The special military operation is aimed precisely at fundamentally eliminating the threats that the North Atlantic Alliance had been creating right on our borders. Not for a day, not for a year, but for decades. Russia had issued multiple warnings. President Putin devoted countless speeches and statements to this issue. Unfortunately, he was not heard. This only confirms what President Putin recently said in an interview with Pavel Zarubin, how his and our shared perception of relations with the West has evolved. At first it seemed that once ideological differences were removed, everything would be fine. Then it became clear that the issue was not ideology, that the West, regardless of what ideology was practiced in the Russian Empire, in the Soviet Union, or in post-Soviet Russia, was driven by only one idea. The idea of geopolitical containment, suppression, or even direct military destruction of Russia, as has happened more than once in history.
This is your mother telling you, don't touch the hot stove, it will burn you. And if you're stupid enough not to listen to mom, you're going to get burned. That was exactly what Lavrov was saying. I don't know if you had a chance to watch Putin's interview with the interview that Pavel Zarubin did with Putin on Sunday. I posted it at Sonar 21 on Monday. But it's well worth watching. And what a contrast, first, with just how Putin speaks. He delivers coherent sentences. He's able to talk about history and historical references. But focus in on what was so critical about what Lavrov said there. He said, look, we used to think that the animus in the West was because we were communists. But that communist ideology, that's gone. We're now Russian nationalists. We're based on Christianity. He didn't say that explicitly, but that's what he meant. And he says, and instead of getting embraced by the West, because we're now nationalists, we're not embracing communism, we're promoting capitalism, and we promote Christianity, they still are building up militarily and coming after us. And he says, now we realize they want to destroy us. So Russia understands what the threat is. And that was what was so dangerous about one of the proposals that was on the table for Donald Trump, because they're talking about sending Tomahawk cruise missiles. If Trump had done that, the chances of a nuclear war would have risen dramatically, because that particular missile is capable of carrying, it is configured to carry a nuclear warhead. And Russian military planners would have assumed if that's being deployed, we've got to strike to prevent it. And at least
because, correct me if I'm wrong, when the thing's flying, if you're watching radar or anything else, you have no idea what the warhead is. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah. You have to assume. You can't assume that, oh, well, it's benign. And then on top of that, when you add in the comments in the last 24 hours by Lindsey Graham and by Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State and the head of the CIA, where both have basically said, in no uncertain terms, we ought to bomb, decapitate, and bomb St. Petersburg or Moscow.
You know, I missed that part.
Well, what they said was, we need to do we just ask the Iranians what happened if they didn't do what we said. Well, what happened in Iran? There was decapitation and then military attack. That when those kinds of words are used, the Russians don't assume, oh, they didn't mean it. They're just joshing. You know that Lindsey Graham, he's just a character. No, they take it dead ass seriously.
Well, plus you see Lindsey Graham genuinely does have a lot of influence over Trump, as we've seen just recently. And let's get back to that 50-day issue. The second part of Lavrov's comments here were specifically about the 50-day deadline.
Therefore, as Dmitry Peskov said, we indeed want to understand what stands behind this statement. 50 days. Before, it was 24 hours. There was also 100 days. We truly want to understand what motivates the President of the United States. It is clear that he is under enormous, I would even say indecent, pressure from the European Union and the current NATO leadership. who unceremoniously support the demands of Zelensky to continue pumping his regime with modern, including offensive, weapons at the expense of increasing damage to taxpayers in Western countries. We have a saying, don't dig a pit for another. The sanctions that the European Union has now imposed, and those that are once again being prepared in Brussels, into this sanctions funnel, they are now trying to pull in the United States as well.
I want to get to the sanctions part in a second, but I want to zero in, keeping with our theme of Trump's unreliability, on something he said in the middle of that soundbite about Zelensky. When Trump had that disastrous Oval Office meeting with Zelensky at the end of February, and they got into the shouting match with the vice president and everything, I thought, okay, he's put him in his place now, and because Trump doesn't like to be upstaged, especially in his own Oval Office, that's going to be the end of it. But then after that, Zelensky still seemed, I would say, more successful than anybody else at turning Trump back around to where he's actually doing what Zelensky wants. How do you see that dynamic?
Trump, what I'm told from people who've met with him privately, he is a different person in private than he is in this character he plays on television. And he's very insecure, and he wants to be liked. Desperate to be liked. So that could be an element of it. I wouldn't put it past Zelensky. That Zelensky was briefed up on how to butter up Donald Trump and make Donald Trump feel that he's very important. Because I think that's the one thing. Putin is polite. Putin is respectful, but Putin's not going to get down on his knees and plant his lips on Donald Trump's ample posterior.
I'm glad of that, by the way.
Yeah.
The imagery is really unpleasant.
But I think that's part of what's going on. It is, notice, Donald Trump's in a position where he could have brought an end to this by doing a couple of things. One, toning down any rhetoric or criticism of Russia, or if you're making criticism of Russia, do an even-handed criticism of Ukraine. But what we've seen is there have been repeated terrorist attacks and military attacks on civilian targets in Russia. Not a word of condemnation by Donald Trump on that. On the other hand, Trump condemning attacks where Russia, accusing Russia of deliberately attacking civilians, which they are not. And that was one of the things that, when your interview with Alex yesterday, he was just dead wrong. With the Russia's precise strikes with these Iskander missiles, they're deliberately avoiding civilian targets. How do I know? Because you remember early on in the war when there were, quote, civilian casualties attributed to Russia, Ukrainians brought all the press in. Here, take a picture of this body, take a picture of that body. Now, it turns out that whole thing was staged. But the point is, Ukraine, if they had really that amount of civilian casualties, they'd be bringing people in. But here's Trump.
Let me ask you a question, though, because and it's been more than a week ago now, when there was a couple of big strikes on Kiev, when they were the source of a lot of these drones, there was a lot of imagery which we showed on this channel that were civilian buildings that were inflamed there. Is that how do you explain that part?
Well, what we've had in those civilian buildings are the military and NATO officers using them. I mean, Russia is not, when Russia targets, what we've seen consistently over the war, they're going after targets based on intelligence. They're not just throwing something in there saying, let's see where it hits. They've been very specific about what they're hitting. And it's just like the strike they carried out 2 days ago in that Olympics terminal port in Odessa, because that was just turned over to 2 U.S. investment firms. And Russia said, okay, here's your investment. We'll help with your remodeling. We'll do the destruction for you. But the point of all this is that Trump could have been even-handed in that. He hasn't been. Trump could have suspended and ended the weapon supply.
And what do you say to those people who say, well, how could he be even-handed? That's immoral. We're helping Ukraine. Russia was the aggressor. So how would you answer those people who say that?
Yeah, because Russia was not the aggressor. We were the aggressor. We're the ones that started this. Russia wanted to join NATO back in 2000, and we said no, refused. And that was one of the points that Putin made in his interview with Pavel Zarubin on Sunday. He said, we made repeated overtures on how we could cooperate and work together with the West on national security issues. And Putin said everyone was rebuffed. And then in response to those rebuffs, the United States and Great Britain, with the assistance of NGOs, organizations in Kiev, constructed a coup and overthrew a democratically elected government because it didn't want to break relations with Russia.
Right.
And then passed a law to outlaw speaking of Russian in the Donbass territories, where the people have been speaking Russian from the time they were born, including Vladimir Zelensky, and then launched a military operation against them. So the Russian special forces did intervene on behalf of and with the militias, but there were a lot of members of the Ukrainian army at that time that defected to fight. Yeah. This has been provoked. This has been going on, and the President Putin gave to Biden a specific proposal on let's get these agreements in place. And one of them was to limit what missiles would be deployed in Europe. And Anthony Blinken told Lavrov in January of 2022, basically, screw you guys. We'll put whatever the hell we want in there. You don't have a say over it.
And he didn't like that? That's really strange.
Yeah. Just imagine.
We gave instructions.
Yeah.
In terms of what we've been doing in interface, I want to go to something that I had never seen publicly admitted until today. And that is, I'm going to show you Jack Keane. I know ordinarily that's just going to cause your eyes to roll, but he says something in here today that was kind of eye-opening to me. And I wonder if you'll comment on how this might have been received in Russia.
Every weapon that we have given Ukraine and every weapon that the Europeans have given them, they're all used to defend themselves against an invasion force. I mean, they have U.S. F-16 aircraft there. There's actually retired F-16 pilots flying some of those airplanes, Americans. That could obviously be considered an offensive weapon. But the reality is they're all conducting defensive operations against an invasion force. And certainly if there are bases that are providing aircraft and the Ukrainians can attack those bases where the airplanes are before they fly over their cities and drop the bombs and have to wait until they get over the cities to attack them, which one of those is a better answer?
So right after that clip got cut off there, the anchor said, wait. You said there's American pilots in these F-16s. And so now if these American pilots are doing what he suggested and attacking targets deep inside Russia, what kind of reaction is that going to get?
Yeah, well, Russia has not reacted up to this point to clear provocations by the United States that I always say, turn it around. If Russia was doing what we're doing to us, how would we react? Well, we'd see it as an act of war, and there'd be calls for military strikes and attacks. But I always maintain one of the reasons the Russians don't hit that button so quickly is because of the lingering memory of losing 27 million people in World War II. They understand on a human basis, a family basis, what it's like to suffer those kinds of losses. Americans, we've hardly been touched. And not trying to offend the veterans of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, but total KIA on that, I believe, is less than 7,000 in both wars. So come on, that was just a bad day in Stalingrad, and Vietnam, 58,000. Hey, we lose that many a year in automobile accidents, or used to, till they required seatbelts. Again, it's inconsequential. It doesn't shake the fabric of society. So, but by admitting this now, I think the Russians I don't think they're going to go off and start bombing Washington, D.C. or attacking the continental United States. Not yet, at least. But if they follow through with long-range missiles that start striking in St. Petersburg and Moscow, which I think the Russian air defense system actually is capable of fending them off. But if anything gets through and causes significant damage, the pressure for military strike against NATO facilities in Europe is going to be off the charts in Russia.
So, and kind of to wrap up this section here, what do you think is I guess going to happen in the near term, given that they don't know who they're dealing with in Washington? Maybe it's the Trump that says, yo, I like Putin, I know what he's going to talk about, we're going to bring this to an end, or the one that says, no, actually, we're going to levy sanctions on you and we're going to help Ukraine. How does Russia behave from this point forward?
Russia is going to ignore Washington, largely. They recognize that Trump's 50-day is a meaningless number. 100 days, because they watched him say, was it back in February? He told Hamas, it was on a Tuesday, you release those hostages or by Saturday there will be hell to pay. And Saturday came and went, and there was no hell to pay beyond the hell that they're living with. So they know that, Trump is a used car salesman. He is, he will say whatever he thinks needs to be said to try to close a deal. He'll make all sorts of promises. This is a car driven once by a little old lady, and she only got 5 miles on it. Trust me. I'm not telling you that we adjusted the odometer. So that's Donald Trump. And I think the Russians understand that. Meanwhile, the pace of their military campaign is ticking up, and it's going much quicker. Again, I disagree with Alex on the pace of it. I mean, I like some of his analysis, but as far as the taking of Pokrovsk, I think Pokrovsk will be completely surrounded and abandoned by the Ukrainians within probably 30 days.